In today's readings, in particular the first reading and the gospel reading, the theme of vocations or discipleship is very evident. And what is also clear in the gospel reading, when our Lord calls certain individuals or they offer to follow him, our Lord is indicating that, if you follow me, you will have no security, no place to lay your head. Basically, you're going to live in poverty. Now, note when the individual says, Lord, first let me go and bury my father. For us, when we read that, we think, oh, his father just died and he's going to have a funeral. But that's not what it's saying. So in the Hebrew language, the understanding is, my father is old. Wait until he dies, wait until I bury him, and then I will come and follow you. But the message of our Lord, or the call of our Lord, is urgent, especially when we read how he set his face to go to Jerusalem. In other words, his time remaining is limited. He's going basically for his crucifixion. So the time to respond is now. And sometimes that's an important message for us, because sometimes God gives us certain inspirations or inclines us to do certain things, but if we don't respond right away, we might lose the opportunity. And I think it's true to say that even today, people are called to follow our Lord to this extreme level. Total renunciation of the things of this world, saying goodbye to their family, and just committing their lives totally to following Jesus. So those who are called to the priesthood and those called to the religious life, religious brothers and sisters. Now with the priesthood, for diocesan priests, we don't take a vow of poverty the way that the religious do. So we can actually have some possessions and, we have greater contact with our family. But for the religious, they often will live in a monastery. So it's much more drastic. And it's wonderful to see that young people are still responding to this call of God to enter into religious life or to pursue the priesthood. And some young people, they're afraid to discern what God might be calling them to. Their attitude is, well, I don't want to be a priest. I don't want to be a nun. It's kind of like they have their whole life planned out before, even they're fully mature. But God never calls us to something that is not good for us. And I think it's true that it's not a good idea to be pressured into one of these vocations. It's something that has to be freely chosen, but usually there has to be an appeal. In other words, we tend to choose things that appeal to us. So, for me, when I was discerning my priesthood, it took me 2 years. I was going back and forth. Should I get married? Should I become a priest? And, near the end, it's just, I said to God, I don't know what's going to make me happier. Whatever you want, God, that's what I'll do. And God, I felt that God revealed to me that he wanted me to be a priest, and I have no regrets regarding that. So we have to discern, and God only calls us to what is truly beneficial for us in the here and now, but also for all eternity. The vocation we are called to is the one most conducive to our sanctity. Now, some people are called to be married. Some people are called to be single. And these are legitimate vocations, and we achieve our sanctity, our holiness, through the vocation that we are called to. So most people are not called to renounce the world and worldly goods to the extent as the disciples, the close disciples of our Lord were, but we are all called to be followers of our Lord. And to be followers of our Lord, we have to make a certain amount of sacrifices. We have to make choices. You chose to be here this morning. You could have done something else. So you made a sacrifice, or you made a choice to be here, and God will reward us for our efforts to try to get closer to him. But notice in today's second reading from Paul's letter to the Galatians, for freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery. For you were called to freedom, brothers and sisters. Only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for self overindulgence. Now, when we think of slavery, we can think of the Jewish people when they were enslaved by Pharaoh in Egypt, and God through Moses released them from their slavery. At the time of our Lord, the Romans were in control, so the Jewish people didn't have total freedom. They kind of resented it. They weren't really slaves, but they didn't have total freedom. And even today, some people are very concerned that we are losing many of our freedoms, our freedom of speech. And even in regards to, they have this plan to make it so that society becomes totally cashless, so everything is just digitalized. And there's advantages to that, but the problem is that it can be used in wrong ways. So when we have a cashless society and everything is digitalized, the government can take advantage of that and introduce a social credit system, which is already existent in some countries. And the governments can use this social credit system to discipline people. In other words, if you speak out against the government or you say something that's not appropriate, that the government doesn't like, your social credit score goes down, you have less access to your funds in your bank account, and you may be restricted in what you can do with your money. So in other words, we would be losing our freedoms. And a lot of people are very concerned about this. And so some people, they're making a point of using cash more often so that it's in circulation, so people are still used to it. And then, in some stores I've noticed they're doing away with the tellers and the cash registers. Everything is just digitalized. You self-checkout things, right? So even in churches, they've already introduced, those things in restaurants where you pay on a machine with your credit card. Some churches are already using those. So instead of cash donations, they're using these digital currencies. So something to be concerned about, but this is not what St. Paul is talking about. So just a little aside there. But what St. Paul is talking about is the slavery of sin. Every sin that we commit it because there's some appeal, there's some gratification, some satisfaction. But the problem is when we commit sin again and again, we become habituated in sin. We develop the habit of sin. And bad habits sometimes are difficult to break. So the ideal is we don't develop these bad habits. So for example, many people become addicted to pornography, which is clearly sinful. It's a mortal sin. It's a serious sin. Now people might say, oh, well, I'm not addicted to pornography, but there are other addictions that may not be sinful in and of themselves, but if a person lacks self-control or overindulges in these things, it could become sinful. So for example, gambling. Well, if you just buy a lottery ticket or something like that, that might be okay, but there's a lot of people who are addicted to going to the casino and they squander their entire life savings, and often it affects their family. They end up divorced because of their addiction. And with these addictions, what happens is the person can't control their inclination towards what they're addicted to. They can't restrain themselves. They lack self-control. They become a slave to their addiction. For some people, it might be watching too much TV, or it might be their addiction might be in the area of food. For many people, or some people anyways, it might be playing video games. Not something sinful in and of itself, but if it's excessive, if it's too time-consuming, it's going to affect your relationships. I have many married women who complain to me, oh, Father, my husband, he doesn't help with the kids. He doesn't do his role around the home. All he does is play video games. And these are adult men. So we can easily become addicted to things. And these things not only affect our relationship with the people around us, but they definitely affect our relationship with God. They affect our spiritual life. And we believe, or people who are addicted to these things, they believe that they need these things in order to be happy, which is totally false. So we need to free ourselves from these slavery, addictive things. We need to be free, as St. Paul tells us. It's only when we are free that we can be happy. And it's only when we are free that we are capable of true love. These addictions, the more we give into them, the more selfish and self-centered and demanding that we become. And when we become that way, we're not going to be easy to live with. We're not going to be happy. We're not going to have good relationships. So we need to free ourselves from whatever things we might be too attached to that are not good for us, that might be preventing us from spending more time with the people around us or helping them, or also growing in the spiritual life, spending time in prayer, spiritual reading. So these are things for us to consider. So we are all called to be disciples of our Lord, some people more so than others, or to a greater extent than others, but we are all called. And it's only in relationships, it's only through love that we can find true fulfillment. Love of neighbor, but also and especially love of God.